Chapter 48 Mazen. Once, when Hakim had first become a prisoner, he told Mazen freedom was a right only appreciated by those who lost it. That is the way of all lost things. One does not truly understand a thing's value until it is gone. Mazen had never felt that profoundly as he did now, sitting in a cave with nothing but his brother's ill-fitting clothes on his back. The sand sea was a distant, ever-shifting ocean, the surface disturbed occasionally by a sinking building. It was hard to believe he had been in those ruins hours ago, even harder to believe there had been 4 of them before they entered. Mazen gripped his newly bound arm. He had ripped off a sleeve to staunch the bleeding, and cast a surreptitious look over his shoulder at the merchant. Luli Al-Nazari was still facing a wall, ignoring him. Her slashed ankles were hidden beneath her robe. Neither of them had talked about what came next. But then, he wasn't ready to continue their quest as if nothing had happened, to keep pushing toward Giban with the memory of so much death hung in the air. Not when when he blinked, he saw her slumped on the ground in a pool of blood. Aisha bint Luas, one of the 40 thieves, dead before she could scream her name. He hugged his knees to his chest and breathed out slowly. He wouldn't cry. He'd done enough of that earlier when he brought the merchant to this cave at the edge of the sand sea. She had just stared blankly as he collapsed against the wall and sobbed, her grief either already dried up or screaming silently inside her. Perhaps the merchant found solace in silence. Mazen did not. To him the quiet had always been a void to fill, but he did not know how to fill this silence. There were too many questions between them and too much guilt. The merchant had not yet asked about his disguise or his purpose, and he did not want to bring it up. He was too ashamed. Some motion in the desert caught his attention. He looked up and froze. Al-Nazari. The merchant didn't turn. He called her again, and she whirled with a glare that twisted into a pained grimace as she shifted her ankles. Mazen pointed outside at an approaching smudge. Someone's coming. He had watched the merchant burn Imad and the bangle, gods, it was an ancient family artifact, to ashes. He had watched Kadir fade to smoke and Aisha die. He had no idea who was coming for them, but whoever it was, they were making a straight line for their cave. Unthinkingly, he reached for Omar's belt of daggers and felt nothing. His brother's blades were gone. The only weapon they had was Kadir's knife, and he was certain Luli would let them be mauled to death before she relinquished it to him. But still he had to try. He blinked, narrowed his eyes. What? What? The merchant snapped. Aisha, he said softly. It was a grief-induced mirage, a hallucination, jinn magic. It had to be. And yet he found himself stumbling out into the desert, rushing toward Aisha. Not a mirage, until he was close enough to see the blood on her. It was everywhere, caked onto her like a second skin. Only the lacerations were gone, and where the gash at her throat had been, there was now a band of skulls that glimmered beneath the varnish of blood. The Queen of Dune's relic. He remembered the Wali of Dime speaking in that uncharacteristically soft voice, laughing as he stabbed his companions and painted the floor with their blood. Before he could run, Aisha bint Luas stepped forward and gripped him by the shoulder. Aren't you going to welcome me back? She grinned, and it made her eyes shine with a mischief he'd never seen before. Then, abruptly, the grin faded. We need to talk. She said, her voice suddenly gruff, and then she unceremoniously dragged him behind her toward the cave. As if nothing had happened, as if she had not somehow impossibly been revived from the dead. Aisha told them the story of her resurrection in front of the campfire. Mazen noticed the way her hands darted through the air and the way her lips sometimes slanted into a lopsided smirk. Subtle changes. But there were other, more obvious differences as well. Her scars, for instance. They'd become an unnatural gray, one that reminded him of dead things. And her right eye, the one that had been sealed with blood, was now more black than brown. It shone like obsidian in the firelight. It was an unsettling sight, one that evidently put Luli on edge too. Mazen did not miss the way her grip tightened on her blade every time Aisha looked at her. Paranoia had dug roots into Mazen as well. More than once he found himself reaching for knives he no longer had. It was impossible to look at Aisha without remembering the Queen of Dunes had tried to kill them twice. Wariness clung to him like a shroud when Aisha finished her tale. Before he could speak, the merchant leaned forward and said, "So who are you, Aisha bint Luas, or the Queen of Dunes?" Aisha opened her mouth, paused, then closed it. Mazen could tell by the tightness in her jaw that she was gritting her teeth. But then, slowly, the tension disappeared from her body. "Don't waste your breath on stupid questions. I could never be anyone but myself." She and Luli silently stared at each other. Mazen inched away. Sitting between them was like being battered on either side by frigid wind. The merchant shook her head. "I don't believe you." Aisha scowled. "I would never succumb to a jinn." "Then what do you call this?" The merchant gestured sharply. "Coexistence? You think I wanted this? I already told you. We struck a deal because this was the only way she—" Aisha paused, breathed out slowly. "The only way we can exist in this world. If the jinn had wanted to kill you, she could have used my corpse to do it without striking a bargain." Mazen felt himself fidgeting. He stilled his hands. "So to be clear, she no longer wants to murder us." "I do not." Aisha uttered the claim so quickly she seemed surprised. She straightened. Again, there was that flicker of irritation across her features. "The jinn wrongly thought you were murderers because of the relics you carried. But I am the jinn hunter. If she wanted vengeance on anyone, it would be me." A sardonic smile flitted across her face. "But instead we made a deal. You can see her priorities have changed." There was a beat of silence as they stared at each other. Though Mazen felt slightly more at ease, Lily regarded Aisha with stony skepticism. "Then tell us the rest of the story. What happened to the jinn that gave you the collar?" "Kadir." Mazen heard his name even unspoken. Aisha raised her brows, inclined her head. "What is he to you, merchant?" Luli frowned. "I see no reason to answer your question if you will not answer mine." Aisha crossed her arms. "He left, disappeared. But he would have come back for me." She scowled. "For the collar. He and—" She clenched her hands. "The queen know each other. He used her power to control the ghouls in the treasure chamber." The memory unfurled in Mazen's mind. He was back in Imad's pitch-black treasure chamber as some invisible force brushed past him. Only in this recollection he saw the force was Kadir, and that he was walking through the dark with the crowler around his neck, humming a soundless song. The Queen of Dunes song. Mazen wondered how long it had taken for the cutthroats to realize the ghouls had turned on them. "I should have realized something was amiss when Imad didn't mention finding the collar," Luli mumbled. "But I never thought Kadir would be—" She trailed off, gaze blank. Aisha eyed the dagger in Luli's hands. "So your bodyguard was a jinn?" "Was—" Mazen did not miss the way the merchant's eyes flashed at the word. But she said nothing, only glared silently, knife gripped between trembling fingers. "It sounds as if you knew Kadir even before we recovered your relic from the ruins." Mazen found his gaze straying to Aisha's darker eyes when he spoke. "If there was any piece of her that belonged to the jinn, it was that eye." Aisha's lips quirked. It was nothing but a twitch, there one moment and gone the next, but Mazen experienced the disconcerting feeling of being judged by not one, but two women. "Yes," she said, "but I cannot tell that story without his permission." She stood and stretched, then began to walk away. "Wait." Mazen stood and followed her. "Where are you going? You can't just—" She turned to face him. "When was the last time you ate?" The question took him by surprise. His stomach, which had been tight with nerves, suddenly churned with hunger. How long had it been? "Exactly. We can continue this discussion after I hunt." Mazen eyed her blood-drenched clothing. As far as he could see, she had no weapons. She must have read the question on his face. "Humans use falcons to hunt." She gestured outside with a thumb. "I have ghouls." Mazen edged his way to the entrance. The moment he saw the 6 ghouls standing sentinel outside, he fell back with a cry. Aisha sighed. "How do you think I got out of the ruins? Ghouls are very good at digging." When he simply stared at her, she added, "Imad forced them to do his bidding with the relic he stole." Her voice dripped with disgust. "But I can summon and dismiss them with my magic, so long as they are nearby." But he had so many buts. He didn't even know where to begin. He glanced helplessly at Luli, but she was not looking at him. Her attention was fixed on the dagger. He realized with some shock that there were tears on her cheeks. Aisha slapped a hand on his shoulder. "Join me, Prince." "But," he said again. He was not keen on being alone with a deadly jinn. Caution battled with guilt. In the ruins, Aisha had saved him. He wanted to trust her, wanted to believe that if she was strong enough to circumvent death, she was strong enough to keep her mind intact. He cast another nervous look over his shoulder at Luli. "The ghouls will be standing outside," Aisha said. "She'll be fine," was the unspoken claim, but Mazen was still worried. Aisha gave him no chance to reconsider. She pulled him out of the cave before he could protest again.